الحوار كتبنا على المعروف.
Good afternoon on this Friday, March 14th. I'm Yumna Naufal and these are today's headlines. President Michel Suleiman states that Hezbollah's involvement in battles in Syria weaken it, stressing that any endeavors to extend his tenure do not serve national interests. The U.S. circulates a draft resolution to the UN Security Council that would declare Sunday's referendum on independence for Ukraine's Crimea region illegal. And Syrian President Bashar al-Assad voices hope that the next Lebanese president will support the resistance axis. President Michel Suleiman says that Hezbollah's involvement in battles in Syria weaken it, stressing that any endeavors to extend his tenure do not serve national interest. He reiterated that the presidential elections should be carried out on time, saying that the national interests compel the stage it. The president's tenure ends this May, but the constitutional period to elect a new head of state begins on March 25th, 2 months prior to the expiration of Suleiman's mandate. He pointed out that the political arch-nemesis should abide by the Babda Declaration to avoid the repercussions of the Syrian crisis. Under the Babda Declaration, let me remind you, which was adopted in June of 2012 during a national dialogue session, the rival March 8 and 14 camps agreed to keep Lebanon away from the policy of regional and international conflicts. A 10-year-old girl and at least one other person were killed in Tripoli on Thursday night after fighting erupted between supporters and opponents of the Syrian government. The clashes, which intensified on Thursday, erupted between supporters of President Assad in the predominantly Alawite neighborhood of Jabal al-Muhsin and rivals in the mainly Sunni district of Beit Tabbani. After a Walid Barhoum from Jabal al-Muhsin was shot dead by unidentified gunmen on motorcycles. The Lebanese army said in a statement that the patrol raided the houses of Omar Miati and Faiz Uthman in a Tripoli neighborhood on suspicion that they had opened fire on Barhoum. The soldiers did not find the suspects, the statement said, adding that the army units will pursue the search. Fatima Ayash, who is 10 years old, was killed as a result of the ongoing fighting in the city, and the violence also left 18 people wounded, 2 of whom were soldiers in the army. The U.S. has circulated a draft resolution to the UN Security Council that would declare Sunday's planned referendum on independence for Ukraine's Crimea region illegal, but Russia has pledged to veto it. Diplomats say the one-page resolution would urge countries not to recognize the results of the vote in pro-Russian Crimea, whose parliament has already voted to join Russia. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, said after a meeting of the 15-member Security Council that the resolution was aimed at changing Russian calculations before innocent lives were lost. Speaking in the Council, she said the resolution would endorse a peaceful solution to the Ukrainian crisis based on international law and the Security Council's mandate to act when necessary to ensure global security and peace. On Skype right now, live with us from Azerbaijan, is Trend News Agency Senior Editor Claude Salhani. Claude, can you hear me?
I can hear you indeed.
Claude, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says his meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is aimed at seeing if he could defuse the situation in order to protect the integrity of Ukraine. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. It's a difficult call to make, really. Russia has vested interests in keeping part of Ukraine, Crimea particularly, where it has its naval forces based in Sevastopol, which is a matter of national security for Russia. It needs those ports.
Well, there's on Sunday, Ukraine's pro-Russian... can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
On Sunday, Ukraine's pro-Russian Crimea region is going to vote whether or not to secede and perhaps join Russia in anger over new leaders in Kiev who are seeking to forge stronger economic ties with Europe. Now, however, the U.S. has said that if it goes through with that, there will be sanctions. Is that going to affect Russia at all?
Well, of course it will. Russia is vulnerable to sanctions like any other country might be, particularly if it involves putting a stop on Russian gas going through to the southern pipeline route. That's brings in a lot of revenue revenue to Russia. So, of course, Russia is worried about that and would try and do everything it can to avoid having sanctions imposed upon it. But I think it goes beyond the sanctions. I think it goes to the fact that the United States and Europe has been pushing Russia, pushing President Putin again and again, and then I think it's gotten to the point where he cannot accept that any longer, and he has to take a stand. And as I keep saying, it's a matter of national security for the Russians to have access to warm water ports in winter when their northern ports freeze over, ice over.
So, say the vote goes through and Crimea is given its independence, what do you think will be the outcome for Ukraine?
Well, for Ukraine, obviously, will be a loss of the peninsula, which is important. But there's little Ukraine can do other than turn to the UN and the EU for a political settlement, which can drag on forever. And the EU and the UN can do little other than impose sanctions. I doubt very much anybody wants to start World War III over this issue.
Okay. You've written an article recently where you said, and I quote, the genesis of the conflict in Ukraine and Syria are similar. Can you explain how so?
Absolutely. Again, I refer to those ports. Sevastopol in Crimea, Tartus in Syria. Tartus is a major facility for the Russian Mediterranean fleet that uses that facility to keep its navy going, especially when they can't reach the colder ports in winter, as I keep saying, freeze over because of the long, harsh winters in northern Europe, in Russia. The other port available to Russia on Russian territory is Vladivostok, which is way over on the Sea of Japan nearly, and so they are dependent on Tartus for the Mediterranean, Sevastopol for the Black Sea. Imagine the United States without access to any of its port on the eastern seaboard, from Nova Scotia, from northern Maine down to Florida. If the U.S. didn't have access to any of those ports, what it would be like for the United States. That's how serious this is for Russia.
Okay. Now, while the Syrian conflict is entering its fourth year and there is no solution in sight, do you think there could be a peaceful solution to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, I certainly hope there will be. I don't think it would solve anything to start a war, and I don't think anybody wants to start a war. Not the Ukrainians, not the Russians, not the Americans, not the Europeans. It would be devastating to everybody if a war was to start over the Ukraine and the Crimea. I think they will find a solution somehow. Halfway measures, maybe certain autonomy to Crimea, guaranteeing the Russian use of the ports, facilities in Sevastopol and others, and work out some deal along those lines.
Okay. Well, we are going to have to get back to you on Sunday and see what happens then. Thank you for being with us. That is Trend News Agency Senior Editor Claude Salhani on the line live from Azerbaijan. And coming up next, the U.S. Navy orders a ship to the Indian Ocean to search for the missing Malaysian airliner. Stay with us for more news. Welcome back. Israel targets suspects' camps of Palestinian armed groups in the Gaza Strip following a barrage of rockets fired from the territory. Israel Air Force aircrafts target 4 terror sites in the southern Gaza Strip and 3 other terror sites in the northern Gaza Strip. The Israeli army reports 5 rockets hit Israeli soil and another 2 were intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defense system. No one has yet claimed responsibility for the rocket fire, but Gaza security sources link an apparent failed rocket attempt to a Salafist splinter group. Israel has responded by hitting 29 targets across Gaza overnight, including Islamic Jihad and Hamas bases, and another 7 air attacks on southern Gaza followed. The violence was announced by both Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and David Cameron, the UK Prime Minister, in the West Bank town of Bethlehem. Abbas stated that as Palestinians, he condemned all military escalation, including rockets. And still making headlines, Malaysian authorities are expanding their search for the plane westward towards India based on reports that it could have flown for hours after it last made contact. But so far they are declined to comment on U.S. reports that the jets had flown for hours after it went missing. Transport Minister Hishamuddin Hussein stated that together with the international partners, they are pushing further east into the South China Sea and further into the Indian Ocean. He's refusing to address U.S. media reports that the plane had flown for an additional 4 or 5 hours after vanishing from civilian radar. The U.S. reports were based on information that the plane's communication system continued to ping a satellite for up to 4 hours after it disappeared en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. However, Hishamuddin insists that the main reason for widening the search field was the failure to locate the plane in the area searched thus far. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is voicing hope that the next Lebanese president will support the resistance axis, considering that his country and Hezbollah are united and share the same fate. He said, quote, "We are interested in the opinions of the upcoming Lebanese president and to what he could offer the axis of resistance, which is the basic criteria." He was quoted by his visitors. The visitors told a Safir newspaper that Assad considers the Lebanese presidential elections as a local affair, whoever the candidates are to be. Asked about Prime Minister Tamam Salam, the Syrian president considers him as a man of morals, urging the political rivals to aid him in his endeavors. He also called on Lebanese to unite in order to confront the challenges facing their country, warning that the sharp rift would allow the Takfiris to spread in their country. This is as Syria enters its 4th year of war. And the United Nations Arab League mediator for Syria warns that if the Syrian government goes ahead with presidential elections, the opposition would probably refuse to participate in a new round of peace talks. Dr. Brahimi told reporters after briefing the UN Security Council behind closed doors that he asked members for the help in making sure that if and when there is a 3rd round of talks in Geneva, it will be a little bit more productive than the 2nd one. In the latest round of talks last month, Brahimi wanted both sides to hold parallel talks on terrorism and the establishment of a transitional governing body for Syria agreed on by major powers at a Geneva conference in June of 2012. The opposition agreed to Brahimi's plan, but according to 2 diplomats who listened to the closed briefing, he said the Syrian government used delaying tactics and insisted that the terrorism discussion be concluded before talks on a transitional government started. And on that note, we end our bulletin for today. Now for a remainder of our top stories. President Michel Suleiman states that Hezbollah's involvement in battles in Syria weakened it, stressing that any endeavors to extend his tenure do not serve national interests. The U.S. circulated a draft resolution to the UN Security Council that would declare Sunday's referendum on independence for Ukraine's Crimea region illegal. And Syrian President Bashar al-Assad voiced hope that the next Lebanese president would support the resistance axis. Stay tuned to Future TV for a special live on March 14 straight from BL. I'm Yumna Nofa live in Beirut, wishing you all a good weekend ahead.